can do like what are the mouth exercises?
Yeah.
Wah, 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 wah. Hi, welcome to kraft-tex University. I'm Galen.
And I'm Betsy. And today we're going to be going over sewing basics, tips, and tricks.
So, Betsy, before you start telling us about washing, you have big advice.
Big advice.
Yeah.
This is my best piece of advice. Don't worry. You know, when we started off, we used whatever we had.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about needles that you can use. We're going to talk about ways to cut it. We're going to talk about washing it. And, you know, don't stress. Have fun. If you've got a certain needle in your sewing machine, just use it. Don't run out and feel like you have to buy stuff. Use what you have. Experiment.
And be
try
happy.
new things. Be happy. Yeah.
It kind of goes with it, don't worry.
Yeah. Don't worry. Be happy. Because we don't, you know, the whole point of this is that it's easy and it's fun and let it take you where you go, you know?
That's Betsy's big advice.
Yeah.
For one rule, relax.
Relax. Be happy.
Okay, so now tell us about washing.
So, if you're going to be sewing something that you're going to be manipulating a lot, like a bag, for example. If you're going to be sewing a computer case or something that's going to stay flat, maybe a journal cover, that you want it to stay flat, you don't need to wash it.
Especially if you're going to be doing some of the surface design techniques.
Exactly.
I would imagine flat might work better.
You want to leave it flat, but for tote bags, that type of thing, you do want to wash it. And there's some specific things that I've found through trial and error that work best. So the first thing you need to remember is if you're going to be sewing something to the kraft-tex that might shrink, like, say cotton twill tape, that shrinks. Ask me how I know.
How do you know, Betsy?
Because
how do you know?
I sewed a beautiful bag, sewed it all up with my cotton twill tape, threw it in the wash. The kraft-tex was awesome. Cotton twill tape, the twill tape just went psh. So pre-wash anything you're going to sew to the kraft-tex because that might shrink, and even though the kraft-tex doesn't really shrink, you could end up with a big mess.
Okay, so that's one of our what not to do's.
That was a big
what not to do.
That was my first.
Don't not wash twill tape and fabric.
Yeah. So once you've pre-washed all of your things and you need to wash the kraft-tex, it's actually really very simple. You can take your kraft-tex, and I recommend cutting it down to a size that's manageable based on whatever your pattern pieces are. Cut it a little bit bigger than your pattern piece, but it's easier to wash if you have smaller pieces. I have put the whole roll in at once, and it actually is not the best. So what you want to do is you want to take your unwashed kraft-tex and you are going to crunch it as much as you can. You really want to beat up that surface, get that surface tension broken, and the more you can work it, the better. It is. It's kind of a stress release kind of thing. So you want to smash that up as best you can. And you can take it in your ball and you throw it in your washing machine. You can wash it. Yeah, exactly.
Good? Okay.
That's good.
I don't actually wash my kraft-tex. I use the designer colors that are pre-washed.
Yeah,
Sorry.
That's kind of handy.
I know. Sorry, I had fun. There we go.
You
That's good.
throw it in the washing machine. You can wash it on cold, on hot, whatever you prefer. Then when the washing cycle's done, you pull it out and you crunch it again. And when it's wet, it's a little bit easier to crunch. You just want to keep working that texture. Then you take your crunch. I throw it in the dryer in a ball. Throw it in there. You dry it, but you want to make sure that you take it out before it's completely dry. It's much easier if you pull it out slightly damp, and then you're going to take it out and kind of just lay it flat and let it dry flat. Because if you, and I've done this too, what not to do. If you dry it until it's crispy and you've got a fold in it, you've just baked that fold in and it's really hard to get it back out. So pull it out when it's damp, lay flat to dry, and then usually I like to iron it before I cut out my pattern pieces because it's still a little bit, you know, bumpy. The ironing does not remove all that great texture you just spent all that time putting in. It does not remove the texture.
Does it make it a little bit softer? When you iron it, I've noticed it makes it a little bit.
It does. Yeah. It makes it a little bit softer, and then as it cools off, it's, you know, it's not super soft. But anyway, you can iron it on cotton.
Okay, soap or no soap, and what do you wash it with?
Soap or no soap? It doesn't really matter.
You can put soap in there.
You can put soap in there, and if you're, because you might want to put it in with some towels or something. Now, note that the basic kraft-tex, which is the neutral colors, the black, white.
It's a test. Remember the test.
Yeah, black, white, natural, chocolate, and stone. Those do not run, and you can put them in all together, which I've done before. You put all the colors in and just wash it, no problem. You can put it in with other stuff like your towels, no problem. However, the designer kraft-tex is, yeah, exactly. The designer kraft-tex is hand dyed, and these I recommend you wash it in cold water with light colors. I would not mix the colors on these. So
can I ask a question?
You can ask any question.
The designer colors are hand dyed, but they're also pre-washed.
Yes.
So if you're not going to wash whatever it is, because I usually don't wash my kraft-tex bags after I've made them, do I need to pre-wash this?
Nope. No, you don't need to, because this has got that great texture. It's way easier. Okay. It's really easy to sew.
And if I didn't pre-wash it, but I want to wash it later, let's say something horrible happens to my bag, because
you drop it in the mud.
Happen to my bags all the time.
Yep.
I can wash it later. Kraft-tex doesn't shrink.
You can, but you want to make sure if you've sewed other things to it,
that's
like
been washed
cotton twill tape, that you pre-washed it. Yeah. Okay. Or whatever fabric you might have used with it, you want to be sure you pre-wash.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's my advice for washing your kraft-tex. It's really not that hard. It's really easy.
And you can do it or not do it.
Yeah. Choice is yours.
I use all my regular tools. I believe at this point Betsy has cut so much that she has a separate set of tools for kraft-tex and for fabric. Worse things happen to my rotary cutter blades and kraft-tex. But kraft-tex is technically a paper product, so it can dull your blades and your scissors over time. So for cutting, really, you can cut it just like you would cut fabric. The biggest difference I find when I'm cutting strips, and actually I had a realization last night when I was making the models for the
before or after the martinis?
It was actually before the martini. It was only one martini, not multiple martinis. I've always had a different technique for cutting strips, because the strips are what really kind of go off. I'm gonna get rid of these. If you're cutting a strip, you line up your ruler with the kraft-tex. And what I've always done is, this is a short strip. Let's pretend it's a long strip. So when you're cutting a strip, you want to work your hand up the strip. You don't want to keep your hand down here, because what's going to happen is that you're gonna go off. The ruler's gonna slip.
The ruler starts slipping.
So my realization last night was I always have the best luck. I'm almost never cutting one strip. I'm always cutting lots of strips.
Yes.
So I scoot that strip out of the way, but I leave it there. So it's over, because the kraft-tex has much more depth than fabric does, and so your ruler's at an angle when you're cutting a narrow strip, and so it doesn't have good purchase. That's why I think it's moving, right? So if you leave your next strip there, it's totally flat. And when I was doing it last night, it didn't go off a single time.
Really?
And the other thing I know, because I always cut things right off the roll, so I almost always have two rulers. One keeps that bad boy a little flat, because especially the pre-washed has a lot of texture. So you'll be cutting, and it's going to, you thought that wasn't cut, but it totally was cut.
Yeah. No.
That it kind of, you need somebody to kind of help hold down some of those lumps. So I just kind of keep the other ruler right there. If I have a really lumpy one, I might even take something and put it on top of the ruler to help keep that part flat.
See, I ironed it first.
And then you can just cut. That one's not cut. I put it to it. So
yeah,
that's
I iron mine before I cut them, because then that kind of flattens it out too. But that's a good idea.
I don't have that much patience.
If my iron's not heated up.
Yeah, so I put the other ruler down. But that's my advice for cutting strips. You keep your strip there. Yeah. So next up is pinning, and we say pinning because you never really pin kraft-tex. You can. I don't have a pin, but you can pin kraft-tex if it's in the seam allowance, so it won't show. But otherwise, the holes show.
It's really hard to pin.
So Betsy has the magic pockets with clips.
You use clips.
So what she does when she's gonna sew things together is she clips them.
I always clip.
No, do you clip that way, or do you clip this?
It can go either way.
So she clips it, right, and you start sewing, and you would just move your clip or remove your clip as you get to it.
Yes.
That works great.
I removed them because I actually have more than 2 clips. I don't need to use the same 2 clips.
You only gave me 2 from your pocket.
I know. Do you want more?
Okay, no. That's clips. That's a great option. I personally use glue most of the time. I love
That's
glue.
so bold.
I know. And not only do I use glue, I don't use water soluble glue. I use permanent glue. So I just take that glue. I'll explain what this is in a little bit. But I take that glue. Okay, you just need a little bit, right? I'm going down. I'm just dotting it along. And it's not that messy, so I'm just going to put the lid back on. And you layer your piece on there, and seriously, if you just sit there for like 5 seconds,
wow,
it's glued enough that you can sew. You can do everything else.
Good.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah. I glue, and this is my advice for gluing too. Here we go. I keep the coffee mug.
That coffee mug?
This coffee mug, actually. This is my coffee mug.
Wow.
And I have a bunch of these scraps of fabric. Because if you're gluing, especially with this permanent glue, you don't want to get it all over everything. So I usually have this like this on my sewing table. And once I use it, I just use this. I wipe off the tip, throw that as it sticks to you because it's permanent glue, into the garbage, put the lid back on, and I'm good to go.
I am so impressed.
I love that.
I am really impressed.
The other thing, I don't have it here actually. Can we, through the magic of video, I'm going to get my stapler. That was magic. I ran really fast. Okay, so when I was doing one of my patterns, you know, the inset seam on the Lucy bag. When you have to attach the end to the bag, you really have to kind of get it under your sewing machine. You know, it's a little bit of a struggle.
Those are awkward.
Right, so the clips would pull right out. They really would. Oh. And the glue is just going to be too messy. So I use a stapler. So within the seam allowance, how easy that works.
Yeah.
Right? So I staple along the curve, and then because I have to trim down my seams anyway, when I'm done sewing the seam, I just sew it off, cut it off.
Wow.
And it's done, and it's so much faster than clipping, gluing, anything else. I staple.
That's very impressive.
Thank you. So now we're going to talk about sewing. Betsy's going to talk about sewing.
I'm going to talk about sewing. So last night, while you were having your martini, I was sewing straight lines because I wanted to test out all the different needles and threads and really actually look side by side. And it was kind of interesting, and it proved my theory that really you're fine using whatever you have in your machine. You really are. This first one on the top is a universal needle, size 80-12. With 50 weight thread, okay? And the next two underneath it is a 90 and a 100.
So these are what I almost always have in my machine.
Exactly, me too. I always have those. And this is the needle is getting progressively larger here, the 80, 90, and 100. Okay. You really, unless you look closely, you really can't see the difference. But if you look at the 100, you can kind of see the little hole there. And you know, I don't know, I prefer not seeing the hole.
You know where I see it? I see it more on the back.
You can see it on the back,
because you always get those little push-outs where the needle goes through, and I notice it mostly on the back. And you don't see, if it's inside your bag, it doesn't matter. Yeah. But if you're top stitching like a strap, you'll see it.
Yeah. So, the universal needles worked great. Then I wanted to try heavier weight thread, because sometimes when you're top stitching, you really want to emphasize that. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I used a 30 weight thread, but if you're going to use the heavier thread, make sure you use a top stitch needle because it's got a bigger eye. And if you try to get it through the other eyes, it's really hard to thread, and then it starts shredding when you're sewing, which really is frustrating. So if you want to use the heavier thread, which actually gives it a really nice look, make sure you use a top stitch needle. Then I also tried the Microtex needle, which is like a sharper needle, and I liked the way that looked too. I thought that, you know, I mean, and again, you have to look really carefully, so don't run out and buy a certain kind of needle, please.
And these are all 80-12s.
Yeah, these are all 80-12s. But if you happen to have one, I think that the little bit sharper needle does make it a little tidier. And then I also tried a jeans needle, which again, I didn't see a huge difference. So really, the bottom line is you use what you have, you're totally fine.
Yeah.
So the next thing to think about is your stitch length. And because the kraft-tex does perforate, it's not like fabric. You're going to leave holes in it when you sew.
So, and you can't tear it when it's regular, but
No.
if you perforate it with stitching, it'll tear.
Yeah, if your holes are too close together, if your stitch length is too short, you could end up perforating it and it's easier to tear. So I like to do a slightly longer stitch length, about 3 millimeters. It gives you a nice look, but it's not too close together that you have to worry about perforation. The only exception to that is when I'm sewing curves, and here I have a little example.
Oh yeah.
I like to shorten the stitch length just a little bit because it gives you a smoother curve.
You know, I have some unsmooth curves, and that's probably why I don't do that.
Yeah,
That's
when
good.
the stitch length is really long, it's sort of like it makes it sort of chunky as you go
Yeah.
around. So you want it to be a little bit shorter, maybe 2 to 2.5 as you're going around the curve. The other thing I should mention when you're sewing curves is that after you're done, clip that curve. You want to take out all that material because, look, I'll show you.
You clipped one and you didn't clip the other, right?
I clipped this one, I didn't clip so that I would have an example. Because when you turn it right side out, here we go.
Yeah.
Doo-doo-doo. It's coming really.
Dun, dun, dun,
Yeah,
dun.
there you go. Thank you.
Welcome. Oh, that's nice.
So you get a much smoother curve
Oh yeah, you have a lot
when you
less
clip
material.
it, because right here all this extra material is kind of bunching up underneath, so it makes it a lot harder to get that smooth curve. So remember to clip your curves. That really helps, makes a big difference in your thing. So very important, this is probably one of the most important things. When you start your seam, what I like to do, like, let's pretend that we're going to sew right along here. This is my seam here. Bring your presser foot down about 1/4 of an inch in. If you can just imagine here, this is your presser foot. Bring it about 1/4 of an inch in, back up, and then go forward. Like
so
a lot of
backstitch a lot.
Right, a lot of times when you're sewing fabric, you just sew in, you backstitch, and you go again. So by that point, you've gone 3 times over. This way, at least you're avoiding one of them.
Just 2, and that'll lock in the stitches well enough.
Yeah, exactly.
And you don't have to backstitch at all if you're going to cross over that seam with another line of stitches.
Yeah, exactly. In order to get a really straight top stitch, Galen has another trick.
You have clips in your pocket, so I have my presser foot in my pocket. Here is my favorite presser foot. It's a, oh my gosh, blind hem, so I totally forgot the name of the stitch. The foot, it's a blind hem foot, and this isn't really what the foot's made for, but what it allows you to do, because it has this little flange in the middle of the foot, you can run that, because the kraft-tex is thick, so it runs along the edge of the kraft-tex so perfectly, and you just adjust your needle to the left, however far you want your stitches in. But it allows you to get a really straight line.
That is really straight.
Isn't that lovely?
Impressive.
Yeah, because on kraft-tex, if it's a decorative thing or if it's going to be on the outside of the bag and you're going to put 2 pieces of kraft-tex together, you don't necessarily need to seam them and open up the seam. You can, and you can top stitch the edges if you want to keep them down, but you can just layer it, put one over the other, and top stitch down to hold them together. I love that.
I could use a little fake.
In all the right places.
Yeah. A little fake here, a little less fake there.